All right, guys, if you're back here, you're with Mr. DeCecco, U.S. History, and I'm gonna take you through the time period right after the Depression hit. And if you got your worksheet handy, it should be Hoover's response. So Herbert Hoover was the president when the Depression hit in 1929. You may remember Black Tuesday, the official date of the beginning when the stock market crashed. But when you're staring here, I mean, we dealt with this in our last video. If you watched it, causes of the Depression. Once again, there wasn't one particular issue that caused the Great Depression. There was a series of events, a series of maybe governmental policies, less governmental oversight, which led to that Great Depression that was experienced throughout the 1930s, beginning in 1929. So overproduction, huge, buying stocks on margin, speculating in the stock market, unequal distribution of income. All of these were a lot of the causes of that depression. And, if you remember those roaring 20s, people were buying things with money they didn't have. So the excessive buying on credit. So there's your little grocery list of issues leading up to the Depression. So I'm going to introduce you Herbert Hoover here, right? President from 1929 to 1933. Notice he is only the president for one term, for the 4 years. He pretty much takes the blame for the Depression and doesn't deal with it effectively enough. And in 4 years, the American people are going to be searching for a new leader. So he is a Republican who took over after Calvin Coolidge. If you remember, Coolidge and Harding were the two presidents who took you through the roaring 20s, both Republican, laissez-faire type attitudes. And, looking at the two here, you got Coolidge saying, don't expect to build up the weak by pulling down the strong. Coolidge was, laissez-faire in favor of big businesses. And, Herbert Hoover is going to kind of take that trend and continue it. And his big quote or big saying throughout the Depression was, "Hey, folks, don't worry. Prosperity is just around the corner," which was great for a soundbite, but didn't necessarily lead to prosperity for the 25% unemployed. So we're going to take a look at his quick economic plan and what he believed the government's role should be. So the first thing is he felt the government should not become directly involved in the economy. The economy would turn itself around and fix itself, and the government's role was not to interfere with that. So he did promote programs that would help the business side of things. We'll look at his Reconstruction finance in a minute, and he's really going to help out businesses in the hopes that benefit or that help that the businesses were getting would trickle down to the workers and consumers and to the regular folk, if you will. Trickle-down economics does work. It takes time. And, you can see what he did here with the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Herbert Hoover took government money, lent it to railroads, banks, and mortgage companies, and insurance companies, and other businesses. And the kicker here is that the people who really needed those loans right away or needed that money were the unemployed working class people. And Hoover, once again, was not willing to give that direct relief. So you're going to see that again. At this point, because of the Depression hitting the globe, any payment of war debts left over from World War I, that whole system of reparations kind of came to a halt during the Depression. So if you want to pause this here, get down to 3 vocab for the worksheet on this, that'd be great. I'm just going to keep cruising. You could study those at will later on, right? So really, when you look at any one of Hoover's programs, you're kind of really looking at the failure. So what he did not do, and this is the key word right here, I should put this in bold, right? Hoover failed to provide direct relief where it was needed. He would not give people what they needed at that moment. Once again, he relied on that trickle-down theory, right? His image as leader was damaged. I mean, he obviously only was president for 4 years. And he kept telling Americans that, don't worry, the economy is improving and everything's going to be better. Well, there's Uncle Sam, and he's getting hit with the Hoover prosperity, and it doesn't look like it's getting better. It looks like a long tornado is in store for the American people. So as we move to an event that happened while Hoover was president, and this is one that really puts him on the negative radar for the American people, and that is the bonus army. So before 1932, a bunch of World War I veterans were promised a bonus that would be paid in installments over a period of time. Well, what happens? The Depression. Now they're a bunch of World War I veterans who are unemployed. And in 1932, they gather themselves together from all parts of the country and they camp out in Washington, D.C. And what they were proposing to Congress and to the president was don't pay us our bonus in these installments. Give us the lump sum right up front. Just give us the money now. And they were promised that bonus, so it's not like it's money they weren't going to receive, but they just needed it right away. So it was to be paid over a period of years. So they demanded that immediate payment, and it's kind of a sad story here. Herbert Hoover said the deal's a deal, and we're going to stick with it. You will get that bonus over a period of time as it's going to be installed. He called in the army, and they came in with fire hoses, and they really just move them people right out of the way. And it was kind of a negative, look at Hoover. So here's like a example of like a Hooverville, Washington D.C. These are all your unemployed veterans, and they're just there peacefully to let the president know that they want their bonus. And when you look at what happened, you got like the veterans on the steps. They're doesn't look like they're causing any trouble. And what is their fate? Here comes the federal army. And in short, Hoover saying, get off my front lawn. You guys don't need to be here. And you see the backdrop of the Capitol there. So kind of a sad event during Hoover's presidency, and it's one that kind of shows up on the exam once in a while. So get ready for that one, right? Pretty bad. Well, let's take a look at his philosophy then. And once again, you're going to see these words again. He opposed direct relief for the homeless and the unemployed. He's not going to give them that direct help. Kept saying the economy would fix itself, and he believed that the government's role wasn't to take care of people. And that they're going to get that help from the private sector, from the businesses, once businesses start to hire again. All right. And he referred to this as rugged individualism, another key vocab here. So if you want to look at those two terms and put them together, he basically believed that man should tie his own bootstraps and go find work. I mean, if you need a job, go find it. The government is not here to give you a job. If you need bread, well, go get a job and get yourself some bread or whatever. So really, the whole idea of rugged individualism is people are here to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? People need to look after and take care of themselves. It is not the government's job. Well, the 25% of Americans who were unemployed did not want to hear that, right? So we'll look at the human impact first before we look at what's happening to different various groups. I mean, here you got a bunch of unemployed men in the free soup and bread line. This is a migrant farmer, and a famous picture from the Depression. You could just see the angst in her face. I mean, with the children, she's got nowhere to go, right? And I kind of like this one right here, right? Wanted a decent job. He's like, I want to work. I don't want a handout. I want to work, right? War veteran, paying on home, college trained. He's got skills, but there were just no jobs, right? So same thing here. Wanted, decent job, family man. He's willing to work, right? And you could see that kind of despair in their faces. Really bad time, right? So let's just take a look at the numbers, right? Unemployment at its height in 1932, unemployment rose to its highest it ever has been in American history, 25%. Over 12 million people were unemployed. Now, I throw that percentage out there just so you can kind of get a feel for those numbers. 1 in 4. Some kind of misconception because they say, well, during the Depression, nobody had a job. Well, it's not necessarily true, right? 3 out of 4 people still had a job, but when you look at 25%, that is way too high. A good unemployment rate for a nation is 2 to 3%. Once it creeps around like 4 to 5%, things are going to get ugly. And I've seen that in my lifetime. I've never seen that. I mean, I can't even imagine, right? What did you see? Bread lines, soup kitchens, just people looking not for a handout. They don't want them for free, but they just need to continue with their lives and keep feeding their bodies till they find work, right? The American Red Cross did help, but they were limited in the amount of resources that they had. Voluntary contributions were down, so there's only so much that the Red Cross and Salvation Armies and those types of places can do. Banks failed. There was a run on banks. People ran to banks, took their money out, and once a bank ran out of money, they simply closed their doors, and if you didn't get there fast enough, you were never going to see your money, right? Companies failed. People lost jobs. That's easy, right? It's just the unemployment is those numbers are staggering. So we're going to take a look at some specific groups now and how it affected them. So African Americans and the unskilled laborers were the first to experience unemployment. So we looked at that 25% total. If we look at group by group, it may be higher amongst certain groups, right? So by 1931, African American unemployment was estimated between 30 and 60% higher than white unemployment. So when we make this statement here, the numbers are there to back it up, right? African Americans are the first to experience that unemployment. Women, if they did work, there was kind of this expectation that they should not be working and give those jobs up for the men, the breadwinners of the family, if you will. Families, they moved in with relatives. People lost their homes. Marriages postponed. Birth rates went down. People going to college went down, and college enrollment dropped. So, I mean, when you look at how those unemployment rates and losing of those jobs and those funds and those monies really affected people, the effects are pretty staggering. So keep that in mind when you're looking at, if you maybe got to write an essay on the effects of the Depression. Well, it's pretty easy to see what's going to happen to people, right? Urban life, what's happening in the cities, right? People who lost their homes basically were just living on the streets or living in public parks, public areas, and these places simply were known as Hoovervilles. Little shanty towns, maybe you put like 2 pieces of wood or cardboard, next to a building, and you built a little makeshift roof out of it, and that's kind of how you lived, right? So if I could show you, this is kind of an example right here, right? There's my house, your house, your house. These little shanty towns, I mean, this is all the guys got left, and he's kind of living in this like 3-sided shed right next to a building in a little alley, right? So what do we call these things? They're Hoovervilles, right? People slept under old newspaper clippings called Hoover blankets, parks. Well, I mean, you can imagine the sickness. People died of starvation. Some men just didn't want to continue to live like that. Felt that since they couldn't take care of their families, they were worthless. And the suicide rates, as you can imagine, skyrocketed. So, yeah, that's urban life, Hoovervilles, right? Hoover blankets. What's happening with there's a huge settlement right there, right? Hoovervilles, right? What's going on in rural life? Well, obviously the Depression hit cities, hurt farms. Hit Germany. I mean, it was worldwide. But for those farmers, I mean, no overproduction. They farmed too much, and really no one was buying enough of those products because no one had the money. So farmers lost their homes. They lost their farms through foreclosures to banks. Farmers in a certain part of America, I'll show you the map, but let me show you right here, that brown area, right? There's something weird. It's just like a phenomenon that happened, and it's known as the Dust Bowl. So Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Colorado, New Mexico, they were hit the hardest in this area. There was a series of years with very little rainfall. So things didn't grow as much as they should have. These farmers here kind of over-farmed the land, ripping the dirt of the soil of those nutrients. And what happened is the land literally began blowing away. Heavy winds, not enough rainfall, and you can imagine this is where people were living here in this area called the Dust Bowl. If that's me, a lot of these people packed up and they just decided to move out because they knew they weren't going to be able to make it there anymore. So you have a couple more. That's a car. And this is what it looked like after the Dust Bowl. There's the house. I mean, you're looking at like 4 or 5 feet of dust just kind of blew around, and then as the winds died down, it just settled. All right, so crazy. Why? Well, there's drought, not enough rainfall, and poor farming techniques. They over-farmed the land and ripped it of its nutrients. Migrant farmers called Okies moved to California. So if you ever heard the term an Okie, that is somebody from Oklahoma who moved to get away from the Dust Bowl, and they went to California. They packed up all their stuff in their car and they moved. They went to Cali. There was more rainfall in California, and they felt that the land was more stable. Famous novel about the event, The Grapes of Wrath, John Steinbeck. You get a chance, it's a must read. Hopefully your English teachers are doing the right thing and you're reading that book in your English classes. So The Grapes of Wrath. What's the culture like? People had time. They just didn't have money. So what did people do with all that extra time? Well, spectator sports were popular, but a lot of people could not afford to go. So they ended up, playing some of these other games that, they number one could afford or maybe were free in the local community or maybe a community center or something. So miniature golf, softball, pinball machines, Monopoly was a huge game during the Great Depression. In comic books, 5 cents, 10 cents, you can get yourself a comic book, and Dick Tracy was the one most most desired during the Great Depression. So, I mean, everyone should know Monopoly if you're living in America, right? You know what a comic book is, so people read. And then obviously play these little games with if they can, get a quarter, get a dime, and get after it. So that's what they were doing. Movies were cheap. You go to the movies, you spend 3 hours. You might go to the movies and watch 2 or 3 of them. You might spend 8, 9 hours in the movies. So 1/3 of the nation's movie theaters closed during the Depression, but the ones that were open, they still went to see these movies. Often movies kind of had that depressed overtone to them. So King Kong, Gone with the Wind, Wizard of Oz are 3 big ones. In between movies, there may be commercials, serials, comedies. Like I said, you go to the movie theater, you make a day of it, right? So you got King Kong, everyone knows that. The big monkey in the buildings. Gone with the Wind, staple of America. I mean, if you don't know that, we're in trouble, right? The Wizard of Oz, and then Steamboat Willie, the original Mickey Mouse Steamboat Willie. The other thing people did, because kind of a carryover, if you can't make it to the movies, everybody who was anybody in the 1920s got a radio in their house. So you got time and you got nothing to do, you turn on the radio. So comedies, great George Burns, Gracie Allen, Jack Benny. People listen to these guys to get a laugh, hopefully, as they were depressed, right? But more often than not, soap operas, news, sports, serials were good because you can get lost in those for a few hours. And definitely the music, which took more of a depressed tone to it as the Depression wore on. The Shadow was a great show. It was about the shadow was always lurking, and people who wanted to really be scared, they listened to it in the dark. That was a thing that people did. It does not matter what time period you're learning about in American history. Literature, photography, paintings will dictate what is happening at that time. So the paintings, the photography, the literature was depressing because it was being taken during the Depression, right? So photographs, Walker Evans, Margaret Burke White, reveal the suffering of people. Artists painted depressed murals. Writers wrote about the time period. Dancers performed. Orchestras played, and there was more of a melancholy kind of tune. So there'll be some Okies from Oklahoma there during the Dust Bowl. Obviously not happy. They went have to move in. There's that famous picture once again. Jazz was hanging on even during the Depression. The big swing bands were still kind of doing their thing to keep the mood up. And some of those same names you saw from the 1920s are going to carry over. So Louis Armstrong, Glenn Miller Band, Benny Goodman were pretty big, and you met Duke Ellington and Bessie Smith from the video on the 1920s. So you got those big bands, right? Pop, pop, pop. People were jamming, and they're listening to the tune. So quick test tip. Under Hoover, you may see the idea of trickle-down economics, calling upon people to be rugged individuals, and where people were living during the Depression of Hoovervilles and blankets. And then you got the impact of the Depression, how it affected people, urban life, rural life, African Americans, white Americans, women, put it all together so you understand the impact of the Depression during the Herbert Hoover years. So best of luck, keep studying, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.